At 8:22 in the morning on the first day off the Iran ceasefire, two torpedo launch transients register on the USS Abraham Lincoln's hull-mounted sonar simultaneously. One from the bow, one from the stern, 800 m, both already running, 63 seconds. The Abraham Lincoln has been at combat readiness for 38 consecutive days. 38 days of missile engagements and drone swarms and torpedo attacks, and the kind of sustained operational tempo that accumulates in the crew like a physical weight, each day slightly heavier than the one before it. The ceasefire was announced the previous evening. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the sonar watch had been reduced to minimum manning. By 5 o'clock, the crew that had been running on adrenaline for 38 days had finally begun to rest. Someone knew exactly when that rest would arrive. Someone had been waiting beneath the Abraham Lincoln for 6 days. To understand what was fired at the Abraham Lincoln this morning, you need to understand one thing about the weapons now running toward the hull. These are not missiles. They cannot be jammed. They cannot be intercepted by any system in the ship. They travel through water at 50 knots. And the only way to survive them is to not be where they are going. And the two torpedoes now running from opposite directions were specifically engineered so that not being where they are going is impossible. One torpedo from the bow, one from the stern, fired simultaneously from a submarine sitting directly beneath the Abraham Lincoln's keel at 800 meters. Not behind the carrier, not alongside it, directly beneath it. At the one position that makes the geometry of the attack work and that makes the helicopter prosecution of the submarine impossible for as long as the submarine stays there. Every evasive maneuver that moves the hull away from the bow torpedo drives it toward the stern torpedo. Every turn that avoids the stern torpedo positions the bow torpedo for a better shot. The carrier's turning radius and maximum speed had been observed for 38 days from directly beneath the keel. The firing geometry had been calculated specifically around both. There was no turn. There was no combination of speed and heading. There was no sequence-off maneuvers in any doctrine ever written that solved both torpedoes simultaneously. A geometric trap built around the specific ship trying to escape it. Iran spent 38 days firing missiles from above. Russia waited 38 days and fired 2 torpedoes from below. The difference between those two approaches is the difference between a weapon and a solution. 63 seconds became 56. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb had been at his sonar display for 57 minutes past the end of his watch when the launch transients hit his display. His relief arrived on time at 5:44. Webb signed the watch transfer and stood up from his console and had taken 3 steps toward the door when his passive array logged a contact on bearing 182 at 5:47 that the automated classification system marked as possible biologics, and that Webb standing in the doorway looked at for 4 seconds and could not walk away from not because the signature was alarming because it was wrong. The frequency profile was inconsistent with any marine life Webb had cataloged in 4 years of Arabian Sea deployments. The spectral signature had a mechanical regularity to it that biological contacts do not produce. A specific low-frequency hum that sat underneath the biological masking signature and repeated at intervals too precise for anything that breathes, and bearing 182 pointed directly beneath the Abraham Lincoln's keel at a depth and position consistent with thermocline concealment. Webb told his relief to hold the watch that he sat back down. He logged the contact at 5:47 and began watching, bearing 182 with the focused attention of someone who has found something he cannot explain and has learned over 16 years that unexplained things in the ocean beneath a carrier deserve more attention than the automated system gives them. At 5:54, the contact reappeared. Same bearing, same signature, 3 seconds and gone. At 6:09, it appeared again. For seconds, same position. It had not moved between detections. Webb filed a report at 611. It came back at 6:18. Noting the contact was consistent with large biological activity and that current threat assessments did not indicate subsurface threats in the operating area given the Iranian ceasefire. He was asked to continue monitoring. He logged the response. He kept watching bearing 182 because the Iranian ceasefire had nothing to do with what Webb thought he was looking at. And because biological contacts do not remain stationary for 22 minutes in the same position on the same bearing directly beneath the keel of an aircraft carrier, at 622, bearing 182 transmitted 2 simultaneous launch transients and stopped being a question. 56 seconds became 48. The Abraham Lincoln deployed countermeasures immediately. Acoustic decoys from the stern designed to seduce incoming torpedoes away from the hull by mimicking the carrier's acoustic signature. The procedure had been drilled hundreds of times. The crew executed it in under 4 seconds against these torpedoes. The decoys were completely and immediately irrelevant. Both torpedoes were wire-guided. A copper wire physically connecting each one to the submarine beneath the keel carrying real-time position corrections from the submarine's guidance console to the torpedo's control surfaces throughout the entire run. The submarine could observe every move the carrier made on its own passive sensors and transmit updated targeting coordinates down both wires within fractions of a second. The acoustic decoys generated signatures the torpedoes were not designed to chase. They were chasing coordinates. Coordinates being updated continuously by a submarine that could see the carrier and the decoys simultaneously and knew the difference. The decoys hit the water. The torpedoes continued inbound without deviation. 48 seconds became 39. The Abraham Lincoln went to flank speed and hard to port at 622.100. 000 tons of nuclear-powered carrier pushing every propulsion shaft it had trying to generate enough lateral displacement in the time remaining of the hull off the bow torpedo's projected intercept geometry. The bow torpedo received a course correction from the submarine within 1.3 seconds of the turn and followed the stern torpedo approaching from the opposite direction received its own correction simultaneously. The hard port turn that moved the hull 20 m away from the bow torpedo's previous intercept point, moved it 18 m closer to the stern torpedo spath. The trap tightening exactly as Russia's targeting officers had calculated it would. 39 seconds became 31. The MH-60R helicopter was airborne at 6:22, moving toward bearing 182 at maximum speed, with 2 torpedoes armed and a crew that understood exactly what needed to happen and could not make it happen. The submarine was still directly beneath the Abraham Lincoln's keel. Dropping a Mark 54 torpedo directly beneath the carrier endangered the ship above it. The helicopter needed the submarine to move. The submarine was not moving. It had fired from directly beneath the keel precisely because that position kept the helicopter blocked for as long as the submarine maintained it. Every second the carrier spent trying to evade was a second the submarine spent stationary, keeping the helicopter from acting. 31 seconds became 23. 2 more countermeasure packages deployed from the stern. Both torpedoes ignored them. The Abraham Lincoln's electronic warfare suite activated and broadcast across every frequency it carried. A wall of electromagnetic interference designed to disrupt guidance systems. Wire-guided torpedoes do not use broadcast electromagnetic guidance. The wall of interference traveled through the water and found nothing to disrupt. The Abraham Lincoln executed a secondary emergency turn hard to starboard, reversing the previous maneuver, trying to generate a lateral geometry the targeting calculation had not accounted for. The submarine corrected both wires within 2 seconds. Both torpedoes followed. 23 seconds became 15. Every option had been tried, not quickly, not carelessly. The crew had executed every procedure correctly. Every system had performed as designed. Every doctrine had been followed. And none of it had worked because the attack had not been designed to be defeated by correct procedure. It had been designed by people who knew the procedures and had calculated around all of them. Both torpedoes at 420 m, now running hot. The hull-mounted sonar tracking both contacts with the clarity that only proximity provides. In the Combat Information Center, the tactical display showed 2 inbound contacts closing fast in a formation whose escorts had repositioned to peacetime spacing the previous night and were too far away to contribute anything useful in the time remaining. Everything the Abraham Lincoln carried had been oriented toward threats from above for 38 days. The threat now running toward the hull was coming from below. 15 seconds became 9. In the sonar room, Webb could hear both torpedoes through the hole. Not through his headset, not through his display, through the ship itself. The specific acoustic signature of 2 heavyweight torpedo propulsion systems running at maximum speed, transmitting through the water and through the steel off the hull and into the structure of the ship and into the deck beneath his feet. A sound that communicated its meaning without interpretation. In the engine rooms, in the berthing spaces, in the mess decks and the medical bay, in every compartment on a ship carrying 500 people, the same sound through the hull, through the steel, a sound that every sailor on the Abraham Lincoln had trained to recognize and had hoped never to hear outside of a drill. Rear Admiral Carver picked up the all-hands circuit. All hands, brace for impact. Webb heard the words and did not move from his console. Did not brace. Did not look up from his display because he had been building something since 6:22 and 8 seconds, since the moment the launch transients appeared. And he understood in the same instant what bearing 182 had been for the last 35 minutes. Not a jamming solution, not a countermeasure, something that existed in a single paragraph of a classified technical intelligence document on Russian heavyweight torpedo systems that he had read 3 years ago during a professional development seminar and had filed in the part of his memory reserved for things she hoped he would never need, but could not bring himself to forget. The copper guidance wire connecting each torpedo to the submarine transmits on a specific electromagnetic frequency, not a radio frequency, not a broadcast signal. A low-frequency electromagnetic pulse that travels through the copper conductor itself, carrying targeting corrections from the submarine's guidance console to the torpedo's control surfaces throughout the entire run. The wire is insulated against most forms of external electromagnetic interference. Standard jamming equipment cannot corrupt it because the signal pathway is physical, not broadcast, and broadcast jamming cannot reach inside a copper conductor. But it is not insulated against a focused high-power electromagnetic pulse generated at the exact frequency the wire uses to carry its guidance signals that a precisely tuned pulse at that specific frequency, transmitted downward into the water column at close range, creates enough electromagnetic disruption in the copper conductor to corrupt the guidance signal for 2 to 3 seconds. Not permanently, just long enough for both torpedoes to commit to the last trajectory coordinates they received before the corruption cleared. Long enough for the carrier to no longer beat those coordinates. Webb had been calculating since 6:22 and 8 seconds what position the carrier would need to occupy at the exact moment he transmitted to maximize the gap between the hull and both committed trajectories. The emergency turns executed over the previous 51 seconds had moved the hull through a sequence of positions. The current hard starboard reversal combined with the carrier's speed and the time elapsed since the last guidance wire corrections both torpedoes had received placed the hull approximately 160 m from the bow. Torpedo's last committed trajectory and approximately 140 m from the stern. Torpedo's last committed trajectory if transmitted at the right moment. The right moment was now. 9 seconds became 8. Webb transmitted the electromagnetic pulse at 622 and 51 seconds on the exact frequency from that single paragraph 3 years ago. Both guidance wires corrupted simultaneously. Both torpedoes committed to their last received coordinates in the same instant. The bow torpedo locked onto the position and heading the Abraham Lincoln had occupied during Third port turned 7 seconds earlier. The stern torpedo locked onto the position and heading from the secondary starboard reversal 5 seconds before the pulse. The carrier was at neither position. The bow torpedo impacted the Arabian C-140 off the Abraham Lincoln's port bow at 6:23. A heavyweight warhead 10 times the explosive mass of the heaviest Iranian weapon the crew had faced in 38 days offward. The detonation sent a column of white water 280 feet into the air. The pressure wave from the detonation reached the Abraham Lincoln's hull. 0.3 seconds later, the stern torpedo impacted 180 m off the starboard stern 3 seconds after the first. 2 heavyweight torpedo warheads detonating 3 seconds apart from opposite ends of a 333 m ship. The pressure waves arrived at the hull from bow and stern almost simultaneously. The ship compressing and flexing along its entire length between 2 opposing forces in the same moment. Equipment failed in 14 separate compartments. 11 crew members were injured. For seriously thrown against bulkheads with enough force to require immediate medical attention. 2 forward compartments took on water through hull flex before damage control teams reached them. The flight deck buckled 0.8 centimeters at the bow through 2 windows on the island's superstructure, cracked from the structural movement of the ship beneath them. Nothing penetrated the hull. The Abraham Lincoln was damaged and shaken in fully operational 140 meters and 180 meters. The closest any weapon had come to the hull in 38 days of sustained combat operations against Iran. And both misses had come from a weapon system that had never missed against a carrier in combat before. Webb was already working the next problem. The submarine had been transmitting on the guidance wire frequency for the entire 63 seconds of the engagement, stationary beneath the carrier, connected to both torpedoes, transmitting continuously on a known frequency from a position that had not changed since the moment of launch. 63 seconds of uninterrupted transmission on a known frequency from a fixed point. Webb had been triangulating that position since 622 and 8 seconds, refining the accuracy with every additional second of transmission data, building a targeting solution that grew more precise with every correction the submarine sent down both wires. At the moment of impact, the submarine cut both guidance wires and went to emergency full power. The battery reserves it had been conserving for 6 days of silent waiting, expending at maximum rate as the crew drove the boat south, trying to put distance between their hull and the position the crew above them now knew they had been holding for 63 seconds. Maximum power on batteries depleted by 6 days of continuous operation generates maximum acoustic output. The submarine that had been invisible for 6 days became the loudest contact in the Arabian Sea the moment it started running. Webb was tracking it in real time, updating the solution every 15 seconds. The boat was now 380 m south off its firing position and getting louder with every second. The crew pushing a hole that had very little left to give. He transmitted the targeting solution to the Combat Information Center at 6:23, position accurate to within 11 m on a contact that was moving loud and getting slower. The MH-60R was already turning south. The submarine had finally moved far enough from the carrier that helicopter prosecution was safe. Webb fed updated positions every 15 seconds as the helicopter closed the distance, and the submarine continued its desperate run toward deeper water. The first Mark 54 entered the water at 624. It acquired the submarine's acoustic signature in 2.1 seconds. Clean acquisition, no ambiguity. A hole running at maximum power on near dead batteries in shallow water is not a difficult sonar target. The second Mark 54 followed 7 seconds later. The first torpedo found the pressure hole at 624. The second impacted 9 seconds after that. The Yakless submarine, Russia's most advanced attack boat. 6 days of silent positioning. 63 seconds of engagement gone. Russia's official denial arrived at 7:44. No Russian submarine had been operating in the Arabian Sea. No Russian naval asset had been involved in any incident near USS Abraham Lincoln. The statement was precise and categorical. It lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. 3 separate commercial satellite imagery companies released photographs of the debris field before noon with coordinates that placed it 390 m south off the Abraham Lincoln's last logged position. And the debris was extensive, identifiable, the kind of debris that has not come from biologics. A second Russian statement followed, an unauthorized commanding officer acting without orders. Moscow expressed regret for any loss of life and reaffirmed its commitment to avoiding escalation with U.S. forces. The Abraham Lincoln's crew read the statement at 11 o'clock, while damage control teams were still working the forward compartments. Nobody believed it. Every Russian naval asset operating within possible striking range of any U.S. carrier in any ocean was placed under active tracking by U.S. and Allied AS forces within 3 hours of the attack. The guidance wire frequency Webb had identified the complete acoustic profile of the Yasin-class submarine during its approach, its 63-second engagement, and its final desperate run. The thermoclinic concealment signature of a hull that had been sitting motionless directly beneath the carrier for 6 days. All of it transmitted to every Allied Navy operating anywhere in the world by 8:00 that morning. Russia had built the attack over 6 days of observation and 38 days of studying the Abraham Lincoln fighter on. They had fired at the exact moment the crew was most vulnerable. They had used a weapon system specifically engineered so that every conventional defense made the geometry worse. They had positioned with a precision that made helicopter prosecution impossible until after the torpedoes were already running. It failed by 140 m because a chief petty officer stayed at his sonar display 57 minutes past the end of his watch and remembered one paragraph from a document read 3 years ago and stored in the part of his memory reserved for things she hoped he would never need. Russia tested the window the ceasefire created. The window lasted 38 minutes from the moment the sonar watch went to minimum manning at 3 o'clock to the moment Webb stated his console past the end of his watch at 5:44. Webb closed it at 6:23. America's response was ruthless. The submarine is gone. The acoustic signature that made it invisible for 6 days is now known to every Allied sonar operator in every ocean. Every Russian naval commander who believed the ceasefire created a window of vulnerability in the Abraham Lincoln's defenses now understands one thing they did not understand before. The window they thought existed never.